Namo Buddhaya. Welcome to another video. From today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you one of the most beautiful poems from the Buddha. Now, when it comes to poems, the Buddha had a great talent of uttering poems or uttering verses. We call them gathas in Buddhist texts. So there's a whole array of books that are dedicated only for the verses or the poems that was uttered by the Buddha. For an example, the Dhammapada only contains the verses that was uttered by the Buddha. Sutta Nipata, there's another book called Sutta Nipata, which contains only the verses. So when it comes to uttering poems, the Buddha had a great talent, and these poems are very rich with the direct teachings from the Buddha and very deep meanings about the life. So here's one poem from the Buddha that can inspire you and also that can give you a lot of teachings about the life. The Buddha says, "Let not a person revive the past or on the future build his hopes, for the past has been left behind and the future has not been reached. Instead, with insight, let him see each presently arisen state." Now, this explains about the mindfulness. This is the whole point of practicing the Buddhist way of mindfulness. Now, when it comes to mindfulness, the word that is given in Pali language for mindfulness is sati. Sati is not always a Buddhist word, or mindfulness is not always a Buddhist word, because before the Buddha also, there were people who practiced sati, but that sati serves a different purpose. Now, if you ask from a normal person who practices the mindfulness or who practices the mindfulness meditations, why do you practice mindfulness? You can answer like, okay, mindfulness helps me to relieve from the stress, right? It makes the things easier. And also it helps me to watch my anger and to control it. Now, it is true that all these purposes are served by the mindfulness, right? All these things are served by the mindfulness to control your anger, to control your emotions, to be more mindful, and also to relieve the stress from your life. It serves that purpose. But in Buddhist practice, the mindfulness serves a purpose that is beyond from these purposes. Okay, the Buddha says, "Instead, with insight, let him see each presently arisen state." Now, this is the whole point of practicing the Buddhist way of mindfulness, which we call sammasati. It is to see the change. It is to see the impermanence nature of life. In the first, the Buddha says, "Let not a person revive the past." That means, if you understand what is past, the past is gone. It is over now, right? So the Buddha says, do not run back into the past. Or on the future, build his hopes, right? Do not build hopes for the future. Why? The Buddha says, "For the past has been left behind." Now, what is past is over now. It doesn't exist, right? And the future has not been reached. Still, the future hasn't reached. So instead, what we have to do is, with insight, let him see each presently arisen state. What we have to do is to contemplate, to focus our mind, to focus our awareness on this present state of mind. We only live in this present moment, right? We don't live in past. We don't live in future. We can't live in past or we can't live in future. We only have the only moment that we own in this life is this moment that is fleeting. So what Buddha says is to be more mindful about the experiences that happens in this present moment. Because if you think about the past, it is just an illusion of your mind, right? For an example, we can think about the experiences that happened in the past. We can regenerate that experience in our mind. But that experience is something that happens when we think about the past. that experience is something that happens in right now, but it is disguised as past. We think it is past. Who thinks it is past? We think it, right? But that very thought happens in this very moment. Okay, so how to practice the mindfulness is to be less judgmental, or to be no judgment, to have no judgment about the experiences that happens in this present moment, and also to be more aware of it, right? Mindfulness is non-judgmental awareness. For an example, someone can think, okay, when you become mindful, you only keep your mind in the good place, in a good state. No, the Buddha says, saragang va chittang, saragang chittang ti bhajanati. That means when one has a lustful mind, he understands that lustful mind as it is, right? That means when he has anger in his mind, he understands the state of mind, that thought, as anger. Now the problem is, we become so much judgmental about the experiences that we have. Either we try to react positively, either we try to respond positively, or to react negatively, right? For an example, let's say we have an uncomfortable thought in our mind. For an example, like anger. What we do is we try to reject that thought, right? We try to reject and we try to push that thought out of our mind. The more we push, the more we create the anger. Okay, so in mindfulness, what we do is we don't judge, we don't label that thought, we just see it as it is. Now, when you do that, you start to not to react to that very thought. And once you start to not to react, once you stop your reactions, what happens? The angry thought is no longer an angry thought, because an angry thought becomes an angry thought when we start to react to it, right? It's something like this. Like you're seeing a traffic pass by, right? You're sitting beside the road and you're seeing a traffic pass by. You don't jump into the middle of the road and you don't try to stop the vehicles, or you don't try to chase behind the vehicles. What you do is you sit beside the road and you look at the vehicles and understand it as it is, right? So that you don't involve in them. You don't become judgmental about them, okay? And that is the practice of mindfulness. Whatever comes to your mind, you're mindful of it. The problem is why we become angry, why we become jealous, and why all these evil thoughts come to our mind is we are not mindful of it. Once you learn how to be mindful, you start to be less judgmental and less reactive to those thoughts, right? And also, you start to think before you act, right? Your mind becomes slower and slower so that you can catch the very thought when it arises. And that is the pinnacle of practicing the mindfulness. And also then you understand that every thought has its own arising and it passes away, right? So every experience that we have has the nature of arising and passing away. Once you realize this nature, the arising nature and the passing away nature, that is what we call the impermanence. And that is called the true nature of life. In Pali, we call it anicca, the change. Now, the Buddha says, once you realize something is subjected to change, and once you realize that everything is subjected to change, everything is anicca, the next realization is, if something is subjected to change, it is suffering, right? It is related to suffering. For an example, every suffering in our life, right? Every painful situation, every suffering that we have in our life is due to change, right? We think that we wish the things are not to change, but they change. We wish that certain experiences to not to change, but they changes. We expect that people to not to change, but they change. So every suffering in our life is due to change or anicca. So the Buddha says, yada niccang tan dukkhang. What is subjected to change is suffering. And the next part is yan dukkhang tadanatta. If something is suffering, that should not be considered as self, I or mine or myself, right? So the Buddha says, if something is subjected to suffering, it should not be considered as self or myself. So that is the way to understand the concept of not self. So these three signs of this existence, these three signatas of existence, which is called the anicca, the impermanence, and dukkha, suffering, and anatta, the not self, is the three signata. These are the three signs of this existence, and the whole point of practicing the Buddhist way of mindfulness is to understand these three signatas, the reality of life. So that is why the Buddha says, when you practice mindfulness, when you contemplate and when you focus your mind to this present moment, when it is arising, you know it. When it passes away, you know it. You are mindful of it. And that is the way to understand the true nature of our life. And the next part of this verse is so beautiful. It is so inspiring. The Buddha says, today the effort must be made. Tomorrow death may come. Who knows? No bargain with mortality. That is one beautiful word. No bargain with mortality. Understand that we all are mortal people. We all are subjected to death, and we all are dying. And there is no bargain with it. When that incident comes to our life, we have to get ready to go. So that when you understand this, the living moment, this present moment, is so valuable for you to practice this dharma, for you to practice this spirituality, right? Once you understand that you are subjected to death, you value the value of life. And in the next part, the Buddha says, can keep him and his hordes away, but one who dwells thus ardently, relentlessly, by day and night, it is he, the peaceful sage has said, who has had a single excellent night. Once you understand the true nature of the existence, and once you are not running back to the past, and once you learn how to not to expect the future, and once you learn how to be in this present moment, and to understand the true nature of life, you can live an excellent night, or an excellent day, or an excellent life. So this is what Buddha meant from this beautiful poem. So the whole point of practicing the mindfulness in Buddhist practice is to understand the impermanence of life. So I think this little poem will help you to understand more about the Buddha's way of practicing mindfulness. So I have mentioned all the links and all the things that you need to read about this sutra and this poem in the descriptions below. So go check it out them, and also try to practice this mindfulness in your life. Try to add it to your daily life and enjoy a peaceful and a happier life. Namo Buddhaya.